Hi.
Greetings. In the Pure Worship book, page 168, and the subhead is,
She will never be found again.
what's the point they're trying to make here in their quick transition from the prostitutes of the Old Testament, Ohola, Oholaba, etc., to Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation? They dropped the typology after, it's been well over 100 years. You've had this typology. It's somehow the prostitutes of Israel and Judah and Israel are somehow types of Christendom, and now it's gone, but you're still holding to the same attitude, the same slanderous, really blasphemous attitude that Christ is not using Christendom at all, and he never has. You said that clearly in the last section. But now we want to read what they have to say about, you'll notice it as we go. What are the next 6 paragraphs about? It doesn't take you long to find out.
So it starts, Jehovah does not change. His feelings about false religion have remained the same throughout the history of the great prostitute. So we are not surprised to see many similarities between his judgment of the prostitutes in the book of Ezekiel and the fate of the great prostitute described in the book of Revelation. Note, for example, that the punishment for the prostitute in Ezekiel's prophecies came not from Jehovah directly, but from the very nations with whom God's disloyal people had committed spiritual immorality. Similarly, the world empire of false religion is condemned for committing such immorality with the kings of the earth. And from whom does her punishment come? We read that these political elements will hate the prostitute and will make her devastated and naked, and they will eat up her flesh and completely burn her with fire. Why will the governments of this world make such a surprising move? Because God will put it into their hearts to carry out his thought.
So Jehovah will use the nations of this world to carry out his judgment against all false religion, including the many religions of Christendom. We'll have more to say about that. This judgment will be final. There will be no forgiveness, no further opportunities for religion to change her ways. Revelation reveals that Babylon will never be found again, Revelation 18:21. God's angels will rejoice over her demise, saying, "Praise Jah," and the smoke from her goes on ascending forever and ever, Revelation 19:3. This judgment will stand for all eternity. Never again will any false religion be allowed to rise up and corrupt pure worship. Babylon's fiery judgment and destruction will figuratively send up a plume of smoke that will go on rising forever. When the governments of this world turn against Babylon the Great, they will be carrying out an execution of God's judgment, a great event in the outworking of Jehovah's purpose. This will mark the beginning of the Great Tribulation, a time of unprecedented turmoil. The climax of that tribulation will be Armageddon, Jehovah's war against this wicked system of things. As the following chapters of this publication will show, the book of Ezekiel has much to tell us about how the Great Tribulation will unfold. Meanwhile, what practical lessons from Ezekiel chapters 16 and 23 do we want to retain and apply?
Satan loves to corrupt those practicing pure worship. Nothing would please him more than having an opportunity to turn us away from pure worship and toward a course like that of the prostitutes described in the book of Ezekiel. We must remember then that Jehovah tolerates no rivalry in worship, no disloyalty. We are careful to keep far away from false religion, to touch nothing unclean in God's sight. For similar reasons, we loyally remain neutral regarding the political conflicts and strife of this divisive world. We view nationalism as just another false religion that Satan promotes, and we have nothing to do with it. Above all, let us keep in mind what a privilege we have to worship Jehovah in his clean, pure spiritual temple. As we cherish that blessed arrangement, may we be ever more determined to have nothing to do with false religion and her prostitution.
Well, I think I can, for once, agree with them in their application of nationalism, their application of the category of false religion to nationalism. But that's not original to you. The churches have been tossing that one around forever as to can we be nationalistic or patriotic even, and also be Christians. So this is not an original thought. But you're right that too often nationalism becomes religion.
Yeah.
It's my country, right or wrong. But then you realize nobody has a version more virulent than you do on that. My country, right or wrong, for a Jehovah's Witness means whether or not the society's right at any given moment is not the issue.
Yeah.
Loyalty is the issue.
Yeah. So when your nation becomes your God, that you have a problem. But when your religion, when your organization becomes a God, you have the same problem.
It's idolatry as well as nationalism, false religion, as you put it. But what's the real obsession here? How many times, because we did count them in preparing this, how many times in 6 paragraphs do they mention one phrase? And what is that phrase?
The phrase is false religion, and they repeat it 7 times in 6 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Now, you would think it was all over the Bible from that. I mean, if you can get it in 6 paragraphs that many times, how many times can you find it in the Bible?
But of course, we've made the point prior to this, and we'll link it at the end, that the pet phrase of the entire book on the front cover, pure worship, is a phrase that's not once found in the Bible.
Yeah.
Not once. So that we ask the question to everyone here, how many times do you think that the phrase false religion is found in the Bible? And we did do a little bit of research on this.
Using their concordance.
Their concordance.
Yeah.
This is page 919 of the concordance. And you're not surprised to find, maybe, that since I set the question up this way, that the phrase false religion never occurs in the Bible. So obviously it didn't occur in Revelation, where you find the world empire false religion. The phrase false religion never occurs in Revelation, but it also never occurs anywhere else in the Bible.
Because you don't stop to think that they have defined everything for you in these paragraphs. So you just assume false religion
is a category.
And it's tied to a phrase. But they've defined what the phrase is.
So what are these 6 paragraphs? In fact, the whole book, but 6 paragraphs here serve as a kind of study or microcosm of the whole book. What are they doing? Well, they're brainwashing you using constant phrases, the same phrases over and over again.
Yeah, they set you up to believe a certain thing, to really think it's in Scripture. But what you're seeing it in publications, repeated over and over again. Same phrases, tied to the same scriptures, even if it's not in the Scripture.
Even if it's not in the Scripture. So maybe you won't be surprised to find that the word religion is hardly ever in the Bible. Yeah. So it's not that it's not existent. It's that it's not one of God's categories. When he's talking about his people, he's talking about his people, his covenant people. People, not organization. And
or
not religion.
Yeah.
They weren't religious when he bought them. They were just typically religious, and they were all over the place, as you can tell just by reading the patriarchs and the Moses and Ezekiel 20. They were all over the place when it comes to religion, but they were still God's chosen people, the elect. So the biblical categories are chosen people, elect, and non-chosen people, the non-elect.
Yeah.
By masking it all behind the horrific mask, and the pictures here are horrific.
Yeah.
The harlot being devoured by
I don't know if you can see
the seven-headed serpent, etc.
Yeah.
These are biblical images, but realize that they're not very common biblical images. They're in the last book of the Bible. This is where you get these pictures from.
Yeah.
But the relationship between God and his people is not found in these pictures. The very fact, though, that you've dropped the typology is indicative of your problem, namely that you can't find enough information in the prophets to justify your position that God is graceless.
Yeah.
Because you have a God who's willing to forgive the prostitutes Oholah and Oholibah, even clean them up for his own purposes, but is not willing to forgive the thing you call Babylon the Great, which, by the way, is not false religion. It is Rome, both city and empire.
Yeah.
So that's the analogy where your analogy or your typology collapses completely.
Yeah.
Everybody else knows that Babylon the Great is not the world empire, false religion. Even your ancestor, C.T. Russell, knew
Yeah.
this.
So when you get to the end of this, they're talking about the great prostitute in the scriptures, and they're applying it to both Ezekiel and this prostitute in Revelation. And there's no hope.
No.
This is very clear. They're saying there's no hope for either. The prostitute in Israel or the prostitute in Revelation. There's no hope. Whereas earlier you had a passage that showed hope, that he would clean them up, that he would forgive them and he would clean them up. You've just dismissed it completely.
Yeah,
and just carry on with your same
narrative.
Narrative, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's not just the narrative of Ezekiel. This is the narrative of all the prophets. It's from the beginning of the Bible to the very end. There's hope because God has a covenant relationship with this people. Going back to our question, though, the question we would love you to ask your Jehovah's Witness loved ones is, how often does the phrase false religion occur in the Bible? Let them think about it. Mm-hmm. And then the follow-up question would be, how many times do you think the word religion occurs in the Bible?
Yeah.
And the answer to that one is 6 times.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think it is?
That is, the word religion occurs 6 times. The phrase false religion never occurs. Mm-hmm. And the 6 times are in one chapter of the Bible. That is 2 Kings chapter 17, where you have the narrative of what Assyria attempted to do to obscure the fact that Israel were God's chosen people. They expelled people from the land of Israel who were true Israelites and brought in foreigners who then became what we now call the Samaritans, a mixed breed. So religion in the Bible has that single usage in that one chapter where it's an attempt of the Assyrians to obscure the fact that God has a covenant relation with Israel.
So when you asked me the question when we were preparing, how many times religion, I went to James thinking it said religion, but it says worship.
Yeah.
You know, the form of worship that is acceptable to God. I don't remember the exact words, but the form of worship that's acceptable is taking care of widows. And
that's to do with what you do, not what you believe, interestingly.
Yeah.
It's not religion at all, then, in the sense that you mean it, as it's a set of doctrines that are either true or false. It has to do with how you live.
Yeah. There was one other thing that shows you they just, I don't know, it just seems unbelievable to me. They must believe that every denomination within Christianity are a different religion.
Yeah.
Which is just not true. If you know, so this is how they put it. Jehovah will use all the nations of this world to carry out his judgment against all false religion, including the many religions of Christendom. They're not religions. They're not different.
Yeah. Experts or students of religion in general, and there's lots of those, will make the point that even within what we call Christianity, we would group even the cults, even though many of the conservative Christians within Christianity, Christendom as you call it, would judge the cults as not being part of Christianity at all. Yet sociologists of religion would, because they see what religion really is. It's what you have in common. It's not what you want to make it that every difference becomes a new religion.
Yeah. So because one denomination emphasizes one particular teaching or one particular practice, Baptist, full baptism, you make that a different religion. Well, you know, a person who's going to a Baptist church does not think the person that's going to the Protestant church across the street from him is a different religion.
No. Denominations. So you show that you don't really understand the difference between the concept of denomination and the concept of religion, because for you it's a true or false. It's a non-biblical category, as we've said already.
Yeah.
What's our link?
We're gonna actually link the very first video that we did in this book, called Pure Worship Restored, and lots of question marks after that, because that's basically
This is where they set you up.
Yeah, where they start their way of setting you up.
By picking scriptures from all over the Bible, for instance, the other sheep from John 10, put beside Zechariah 8, where you have the 10 men from the nations who will attach themselves to the man called a Jew, and throwing that in with several other passages, including, of course, Isaiah 60. Maybe that's your favorite, that God will speed it up in its own time. Verses from all over the Bible just thrown in and stirred.
And their propaganda method of using the same phrase over and over again.
Which
so
in
pure worship.
Pure worship in the case of this video that we're attaching, yeah. And also a playlist?
The Babylon playlist.
Yeah, in the Babylon playlist, take a look specifically for the videos that are on Revelation. There's about 6 of them, taking up the 6 texts where Babylon the Great is mentioned in the book of Revelation. See you next time.
Bye.